Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Growing up with my older brother was hell. He's only a year older than me, but he made sure I knew he was the boss. When we were kids, he'd beat me up regularly and act like everything I owned was his property too. My parents never really stepped in either. If anything, they treated him like he was perfect, while I was just there taking up space. He got the better room, the newer clothes, and whenever something went missing, they always believed his story over mine. I learned early that complaining only made things worse for me. The day I turned 18, I packed my stuff and moved in with my uncle. He's a retired police officer and probably the only family member who actually gave a damn about me. My uncle had seen how my parents treated me differently during family gatherings and told me his door was always open. When I needed a car to get to my new job at a warehouse, he hooked me up with this old Crown Victoria that used to be a police cruiser. The car had over 200,000 miles on it, but the engine was solid. My uncle had maintained it himself during his years on the force. It wasn't fancy, but it ran like a dream. I loved that car more than anything. I spent weekends learning how to do basic maintenance on it with my uncle's help. My brother hated that I had reliable transportation while he kept driving beater cars into the ground. Over the years, I watched him destroy 3 different cars through his terrible driving habits. He never changed the oil, ignored warning lights, and drove like he was in a race. His first car died when he ignored the temperature gauge and blew the engine. The second one died when he never got the brakes fixed and couldn't stop in time at an intersection. When his third car finally died after he drove it straight into a pole while texting, he came to me asking to borrow my car. The accident happened because he was trying to send a message to some girl he was dating. I told him it wasn't happening. He called me an entitled brat and said he needed it to get to work. I reminded him that he had called my car a piece of junk just last month. I told him to take the bus because I knew how he drove and my Crown Vic was off limits. He started yelling about how family should help family. I pointed out that he had never helped me with anything growing up. He walked off after that, but I knew it wasn't over. My brother had never taken no for an answer in his life. My parents called me later that day. They told me I needed to let my brother borrow my car. My dad said he had a job to get to and I was being selfish. My mom added that I should be grateful they raised me and this was the least I could do. I told them I wasn't lending him anything because I needed my car too for my own job. I explained that I worked different shifts and couldn't rely on the bus schedule. I reminded them that I was not the only one in the world with a job. He could figure out his own transportation like I had to do. My mom said I was being unreasonable and that blood was thicker than water. I told them it was my car and my rules. My dad threatened to cut me out of the will if I didn't help my brother. I laughed and told him there probably wasn't much to inherit anyway. When I hung up, my uncle was grinning at me from across the room. He said good for me and told me not to let them walk all over me. He even gave me a high five and said he was proud of me for standing up to them. A few days later, I got off work around 11 p.m. and walked to the parking lot where I'd left my car, except it wasn't there. My heart sank as I looked around, hoping maybe I'd just forgotten where I parked. I walked around the entire lot twice, checking every row. But no, my Crown Vic was gone. I had to call my co-worker to give me a ride home. I called my brother's cell phone first, but he didn't pick up. I tried calling 3 more times with no answer. Then I called my parents and asked if my brother had taken my car. They said, of course not, and asked why I would think that. My mom sounded offended that I would even suggest such a thing. I told them fine. I was calling the police then. My mom quickly changed her tune and said he had borrowed it because he needed it for work. I told him he had stolen it and he better bring it back right now, or I was having him arrested. My dad called me a real jerk and said I was overreacting. I told them they had exactly 30 minutes to get my car back, or I was filing a police report. They hung up on me, but 25 minutes later my brother pulled into the parking lot driving my car. I was standing there freezing in the December cold. My co-worker had waited with me to make sure I got my car back safely. I demanded to know how he had stolen my car. He held up a set of keys with a smug look on his face and explained that he had bought Universal Crown Vic keys online for $49.99. I told him if he ever stole my car again, I'd have him arrested with no warnings and no second chances. Then he had the nerve to ask me for a ride home because his friend had dropped him off. I told him he had made me stand out there in the freezing cold after stealing my car so he could walk or call someone else. He called me a jerk and said I was being petty as I drove away. My co-worker followed me home to make sure my brother didn't try anything stupid. When I got home and told my uncle what happened, he was furious. He immediately ordered a tracking device for my car online that same night. The device cost $129, but my uncle said it was worth it. He installed it the next day and showed me how to use the app on my phone. He also suggested I start parking in different spots at work and keeping an eye out for my brother. Over the next few weeks, my brother kept asking my parents to pressure me into lending him my car. They would call me every couple of days with some new sob story. He needed to drive to job interviews. He had to take his girlfriend on a date. He needed to pick up groceries for our elderly neighbor. I shot down every request and told him he could use public transportation like millions of other people. My uncle said I was doing the right thing and shouldn't give in to their manipulation. Christmas Day rolled around and we were all at my parents' house for the annual family gathering. The roads were covered in ice and I'd driven extra carefully to get there. The drive usually took 20 minutes, but took me 45 minutes because of the conditions. About halfway through the party, around 3 p.m., I looked out the front window to check on my car and noticed it was gone. I had specifically parked where I could see it from the living room window. I pulled up the tracking app on my phone and saw that my car was several miles away and moving. I immediately called my brother and asked where my car was. He told me to relax because he had just gone to pick up a friend and would be back soon. I yelled at him that he had stolen my car again and I had told him what would happen. Everyone in the room was staring at me now, wondering what all the yelling was about. My cousins and aunts looked shocked that this was happening on Christmas. My uncle asked what was going on, and I told him my brother had stolen my car again. My uncle told everyone this wasn't the first time and that I had been putting up with this garbage for months. My grandmother asked why my brother couldn't just buy his own car. My parents quickly tried to change the subject. My brother told me to screw off and said he'd be back in a bit. I asked him to please tell me he hadn't been drinking because I could hear loud music and people laughing in the background. He just hung up on me. I kept watching the tracking app, and after a while I noticed the dot had stopped moving and stayed in one spot for way too long. The car had been sitting in the same location for over an hour. Then my phone rang, and my brother was calling for help. His voice was shaky and panicked. I asked what happened, and he told me he had crashed my car. He explained that the roads were really icy, and he wasn't used to rear-wheel drive. He admitted he had been going too fast trying to show off for his friends. My stomach dropped. We all piled into my parents' minivan and followed the GPS tracker to where my car was. The drive took us 25 minutes through increasingly dangerous road conditions. When we got there, I saw my beautiful Crown Vic nose deep in a snow-filled ditch. The front end was completely buried and steam was rising from under the hood. My brother was standing by the road looking panicked with two of his friends. One of his friends had a cut on his forehead from hitting the dashboard. My uncle was livid. This had been his department's car before he gave it to me, and seeing it crashed like that made him furious. He started yelling at my brother about respect and responsibility. I was ready to kill my brother myself. My parents told me to just let it go because these things happen, and insurance would cover it. I reminded them that I only had liability insurance because I couldn't afford full coverage. I said no way, and told them I was calling the police because enough was enough. My brother begged me not to call the cops because he had been drinking before he left and would get a DUI. He said he had shared a bottle of wine with his friends before deciding to take my car. I told him then he was paying me back for every penny of damage, or I was suing him. My brother said he didn't have that kind of money and suggested we just say it was an accident. Before I could make the call, we saw police lights coming down the road. Someone else had already reported the accident after seeing the car go off the road. My parents immediately went into panic mode and told me to quickly say I was driving. My dad said, yeah, we were just there to help me out. I asked if they were insane because I wasn't taking the blame for his mess. My uncle backed me up and told them I wasn't even in the car when their son stole it. My uncle said he would personally testify against anyone who tried to frame me. When the officers arrived, one of them recognized my uncle, and they chatted for a minute. My uncle explained the situation and how this was the second time my brother had stolen my car. Then they walked over to my brother and asked to see his license. We found out his license had been suspended after he crashed his previous car into that pole. He had never told any of us about the suspension. The officer said he was going to need my brother to take a breathalyzer test. My brother's friends tried to walk away, but the officers told them to stay put. My brother failed the breathalyzer test badly. His blood alcohol level was 0.12, well over the legal limit. Within minutes, he was in handcuffs, while my mom was crying and begging the officers not to take him away. She said it was Christmas and he had learned his lesson. The officer told my mom that she and my husband could be arrested too for lying to police officers. He said attempting to help someone evade a DUI was a serious crime. That shut my parents up real quick. We got back in the minivan, and my parents drove me and my uncle home in complete silence. They were so angry they peeled out of our driveway and nearly slid off the icy road themselves. My brother's friends had to call someone else to pick them up from the scene. The next day, my brother was released from jail, looking terrified. The bail had cost my parents $800. He was practically crying when he came to our house. He said sorry over and over and said he would never touch my car again. I asked what happened in there, and he told me the cops kept talking about what happens in prison. They described all the stuff they'd seen happen to drunk drivers who hurt people. He said he was so scared he wet himself during the night, but they let him shower in the morning. His cellmate had been arrested for assault and kept talking about fights he'd been in. My uncle started laughing. He told us that his buddies at the department never actually filed the DUI charge, just the suspended license violation and the theft charge. He explained that the suspended license violation was $600 and the theft was a misdemeanor. I asked what he meant and he said he had asked them to scare my brother straight. He told us to consider it a lesson learned, but this was the one and only time he'd ever helped my brother out of trouble. He said if my brother ever pulled something like this again, he'd personally make sure he got the maximum sentence. My brother was so relieved he almost collapsed. He said sorry to me over and over and promised to pay for all the repairs to my car. When we got the Crown Vic towed out of the ditch, the damage was more extensive than it first appeared. It needed a new front bumper, 2 headlights, a grille, a new radiator, and some body work. The total estimate came to $2,700. My brother nearly fainted when he heard the amount. My brother gave me the extra keys he had bought online and said he didn't want them anymore. I told him that was good, and he was paying for every cent of the repairs. He asked if he could pay in installments because he didn't have that much money saved. I agreed to let him pay me $300 a month until it was paid off. He signed a written agreement that my uncle helped me draft. He kept his word too. He paid for all the repairs without missing a payment and hasn't touched my car since. He even got a second job at a fast food place to help cover the payments. My parents act like the whole thing never happened, which is typical for them. They just pretend their precious golden child didn't steal my car twice and crash it while driving drunk with a suspended license. They never even apologized to me for trying to make me take the blame. The funniest part is that my brother is now terrified of getting in trouble with the law. Every time he sees a police car, he gets nervous and starts driving like a perfect citizen. He bought himself a reliable used car with the money he saved from his second job. My uncle's friends really did a number on him during that night in jail. He still talks about how scared he was and how he never wants to go back. My Crown Vic is running perfectly again, and I still love that car. The repairs actually made it look better than it had in years. I got the locks changed as soon as I could afford it for $150. I also kept the kill switch and steering wheel club for extra security. My uncle and I are closer than ever, and he still brags to his old police buddies about how I handled the situation. I need to give you some background before I tell you about the most entitled person I've ever dealt with. I'm 22 and work in construction. I've been doing this since I was 14 when I started working summers, which is totally legal in my state. Because I've been at it for so long, I became a foreman and run several crews. The pay is really good, but the job requires me to haul heavy trailers and get to some pretty rough job sites, especially in winter. That's why I drive a lifted Ford F350 pickup truck. The whole mess started about 4 months ago. I was coming off a long day at work and didn't feel like cooking dinner, so I decided to hit up McDonald's for a Big Mac. After I got my order, I was pulling out of the parking lot to head home. I was looking hard to my left to check the traffic on the road, but I wasn't paying enough attention to what was right in front of me. I was creeping forward when I realized the guy ahead of me had stopped and wasn't paying attention either. I barely tapped his mirror and scraped his door with my front bumper. I immediately threw my truck in reverse and jumped out. The first thing I did was make sure the guy was okay, then I apologized right away because I knew it was completely my fault. I asked him if he was hurt and if he wanted to call the cops. The guy seemed pretty chill about the whole thing. He looked at the damage and shrugged. He told me we didn't need to call anyone, and that if I just gave him my insurance info, we could get it taken care of. That worked for me since there wasn't any damage to my truck, and it's not required to call the police for accidents in private parking lots, which becomes important later. We exchanged information, and he seemed like a decent guy, so I made him an offer. I told him if he wanted to go get a damage estimate, I'd just pay cash so my insurance rates wouldn't go up. He said that sounded fine to him. We both left and I felt pretty bad about the whole thing, but he seemed cool and I figured we could sort it out without any drama. A whole month went by and I didn't hear anything from him or the shop I told him to go to. Honestly, I wasn't stressed about it because if he decided not to get it fixed, that was his choice. Then one day around noon my phone rings. He told me he couldn't remember my name and wanted to tell the guys at the shop who sent him there because it seemed like we knew each other. I gave him my name and he said the shop guys had given him a deal, which I'm pretty sure they tell everyone. He sent me the estimate and it came out to $2,403. That was more than I expected, but I told him to go ahead and get it done and I'd pay the bill afterward. He said that was cool and hung up. Another month passed without a word until he called me again while I was at work. He told me he'd talked to the shop and they said they couldn't get him in for another 2 weeks or so. He also mentioned they might end up charging him more if they found additional damage. I told him that sounded fine and to just let me know. I said I hoped it would go smooth for him and apologized again for the inconvenience. He seemed to take it well, and I was really trying to be a good person about the whole situation. Then he said that after talking to his wife, he'd be okay if I just wanted to write a check for $2,500 and we could call it even. This struck me as odd because why wouldn't someone want their vehicle properly repaired with everything paid for? But I went along with it. I told him we could set a time and place to meet and I'd get him paid. He liked that idea and said he'd let me know when. Yet another month went by with complete silence. At this point I was getting fed up and just wanted this whole situation off my back. Then he texted me at 11 p.m. one night asking if we could meet in town. I found this pretty disrespectful since I was almost asleep and had to be at work at 5 a.m. the next day, but I agreed anyway. I took $2,500 cash and wrote up a quick contract saying this payment would be accepted as payment in full for the damages and that by accepting it, he would release me from any and all liability. I thought this was pretty fair since it was exactly the deal we'd already made over the phone just in writing. I got to our meeting spot and handed him the cash. He signed the contract without barely reading it and didn't want his copy. This was a red flag to me, but I figured he just didn't care that much about it. I took a photo of the signed contract and sent it to him, then went home to get some sleep. Another month went by with me living life without a care in the world about this stupid car accident. Then I went to check my mail and found a notice from this guy's lawyer saying he was suing me for not paying after wrecking his car. This really ticked me off, but I also knew I had plenty of text messages and a signed contract on my side. I immediately called him and he blocked my number. Luckily, my girlfriend works for a lawyer, so I got him updated on the situation and he said he'd love to help. My lawyer told me I'd saved myself by writing that contract because any contract worth over $500 has to be upheld in any level court in my state. That's when I decided to get my revenge. I remembered that this guy had a business logo on the side of his car, and I'd taken pictures of the damage. I went online to the Better Business Bureau website to look up who owned the company, thinking surely he couldn't own the business because he was such an idiot. I was wrong. This guy owned the company, and I could see he had about 12 one-star reviews, all in dispute because of his shady business practices. People complained that he'd tell them a job would cost one thing, then charge them 4 times what he originally quoted. Sound familiar? Remember when he said the shop might charge more than the original $2,403? That's right, he was suing me for $10,000. 4 times what the shop had told him it would cost. Unbelievable. He was trying his same sneaky tricks on me. My lawyer took note of this, and we showed up to court ready for battle. This guy was absolutely sleazy. When we got there and set up, he walked over and asked if I was ready to give him more of Daddy's money. I guess just because I'm young and drive a nice truck and could afford $2,500, he assumed I was some spoiled rich kid. His lawyer got up and started spinning this ridiculous story about how I'd hit and run and that he'd barely managed to get a picture of my license plate. He claimed I tried bullying his client into taking a deal for only $2,500 when the damage was clearly worth much more. There were obvious holes in his story, and he really didn't have much evidence to back up his claims. Just imagine the smile on my face when my lawyer laid out printouts of all our text messages and the physical copy of the contract that was signed by him. His lawyer went ghostly white and looked like he was about to be sick. After laying out all the evidence, my lawyer pulled out his hidden gem, printouts of all the complaints we'd found on the Better Business Bureau website, showing how this guy was doing the exact same thing to other customers. That was the final nail in the coffin. The judge said he'd seen enough and asked the guy for any final statements. The guy actually told the judge that he didn't even have the $2,500 anymore and asked if he could just get that back and they'd be okay. He literally admitted to the judge that he'd received my money and that his whole story was complete garbage. I thought his lawyer was going to strangle him right there in the courtroom. It was beautiful. The judge ended up ruling in my favor and ordered him to pay my legal fees as well as damages and lost wages because I had to miss work to be in court. The sweetest part was that this particular day, my crew was working on a very high-wage job and I was technically the one getting paid before I paid them out as subcontractors. This meant I was supposed to be paid $475 per hour, and this whole court ordeal took about 5 hours. He ended up having to pay me almost $5,000. I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. The guy who tried to scam me out of 10 grand ended up paying me twice what he originally wanted, plus my legal fees. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.